CNN Breaking News.
Good morning to you. I'm Victor Blackwell.
And I'm Christy Paul. We will start this hour with breaking news out of Minneapolis. There's been a deadly shooting there. Police say 12 people have been shot and one has already died.
So this shooting happened on Hennepin Avenue South, and police say that 11 others will recover. No life-threatening injuries for them. CNN's Josh Campbell is on the scene there in Minneapolis.
Josh, tell us what you know.
Yeah, good morning, Christy and Victor. Violence erupting here overnight in Minneapolis. You can see behind me some of the aftermath. We're here at this intersection, South Hennepin Avenue here in Minneapolis. And what was a celebration, so to speak, people out here just in and around the area turned violent very quickly when a shooting took place. Now, as you mentioned, there were a number of injuries. One person died. I want to talk to one of the witnesses here. This is Fred Wong. Fred, thanks for talking to us. You were here across the street. Can you tell us what you saw?
Yeah, well, so I was standing right at the door here of the restaurant, Hoban Korean Barbecue, and I witnessed everything. So the shooters, they're right here in front of McDonald's, kind of like this end here, by the bike racks, yeah. And then they just started firing off towards our direction, and then that's when everyone dropped to the floor. So.
And you think that it was two groups of people shooting at each other, yeah, so gunfire moving in two directions?
For sure, two or more. That's why you see, this window right here is broken, and the windows at our store, and then also next to us, so they had to have run out this way to, hit the angle of the store next to us, and so. There's probably like 30, 40, 50 shots. I don't know. There's so many. It sounded like someone had an automatic gun and,
And what happened to the crowd whenever that happened? You said people dropped. Did they then disperse?
Everyone started dropping to the ground, and then a lot of people just started, coming into the restaurant for safety. And then a lot of the people that were inside the restaurant started making their way towards the exit. And then as soon as that happened, I dropped down and then I made my way over and then I started directing traffic towards the exit.
Okay. Have you ever seen anything like this in this area?
Well, we've seen like we've heard of gunshots, around the area here. This being, a very, popular place for bars and, restaurants, but nothing like this. Nothing like this.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Fred. We appreciate it. Yeah. And guys, again, what was just a scene here of people out on the street on a weekend evening, again, turning very violent. Again, a number of injuries. We're told 12 people. One person is dead. Police tell us that they have not yet made any arrests in this incident. That investigation remains ongoing. But as we speak right now, they are trying to identify the person or persons that were responsible for this very violent incident here overnight in Minneapolis. Christy, Victor.
All right, Josh Campbell, so appreciate it this morning. Thank you.
All right, also this morning, President Trump's campaign did not really bring in the crowd for his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah, after promising a record-setting crowd, take a look at the seats there at the top that were empty. They did not predict empty seats by any means. Video from inside the rally you see there shows that there were plenty of them. Far from an arena that was packed to capacity, the overflow crowd outside was non-existent.
Yeah, there's a lot obviously going on in the country right now, but the president stuck to the style that you've seen before at his rallies. There was the admission, though, about how he feels about coronavirus testing and a series of some misleading claims, and we're going to fact check those, of course. It made its way into the president's pitch that he deserves 4 more years.
I stand before you today to declare the silent majority is stronger than ever before. 5 months from now, we're going to defeat Sleepy Joe Biden.
So there are some of the people rallying outside, protesters wearing their masks. The president did spend some time vilifying them, even though it clashes with the reality of the peaceful demonstrations that were leading up to that speech. Not a lot of violence by any means being reported from Tulsa this morning. CNN's Sarah Westwood at the White House right now. What is the reality, Sarah, of what happened at the Trump campaign last night to have empty seats when they were expecting, and some say, 1 million people?
Well, good morning, Christy and Victor. And yeah, the reality of the fact that this pandemic is still continuing to rage throughout this country and that people are still wary about returning to normal life sort of collided with the president's hope that he can start to move on from the coronavirus pandemic and start to focus on his reelection effort. The campaign, as you know, had billed this as something of a reboot of his reelection effort that had really been on hold for the past 3 months plus as the president has been focused on dealing with the coronavirus response. This was going to be his triumphant return to the campaign trail. And that's not exactly what we saw last night. The campaign had been promising that 100,000 people or more could have gathered in that area. They planned to have about 20,000 people inside that arena and more than 40,000 people in a massive overflow area. There was a stage set up where the vice president and the president had been set to deliver remarks to that overflow crowd. Obviously, that crowd had all but dissipated by the time the president arrived. They were still trying to fill the empty seats inside the arena. And it just shows that there are people still concerned about the coronavirus, even though the president had promised that his supporters were going to turn out in large numbers, despite the fact that in the county where Tulsa is in Oklahoma, cases had been spiking and concerns about coronavirus had been on the rise. Now, we also saw the campaign blame that lack of attendance in part on protesters in the area who the campaign claimed were blocking supporters access to the venue, but CNN teams on the ground did not see any evidence of protesters preventing anyone from getting to the rally. Victor and Christy.
Sarah, let's talk about this comment the president made about coronavirus testing and the speed at which it is completed. Tell the audience what he said and what we're hearing from the White House about it.
Well, Victor, this is something that we've heard from the president before, sort of complaining about the fact that the U.S., because we have ramped up our testing capacity, because the U.S. has been more transparent about its number of COVID-19 cases than other countries, he complains that the U.S. is unfairly being labeled as one of the leading nations in terms of infection rates. And that's a claim that we heard the president repeat vividly again last night. I want you to take a listen to what he said about testing.
You know, testing is a double-edged sword. We've tested now 25 million people. It's probably 20 million people more than anybody else. Germany's done a lot. South Korea's done a lot. They called me. They said, the job you're doing, here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people. You're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Now, public health experts actually say that expanded testing capacity is necessary for a return to something of a normal life. The president's words last night prompting a rebuke from Joe Biden, his 2020 rival, who said that the U.S. should speed up testing as a rebuttal to Trump. Victor and Christy.
All right. Sarah Westwood, thank you so much.
Police in Tulsa say that the groups near the rally that were protesting last night, they caused some traffic issues, but they were nonviolent.
Yeah, CNN crew was there as police broke up this crowd. At one point, they did use rubber bullets. Despite a night of no violence, before and during his speech, the president did call protesters, quote, very bad people and maniacs. Listen to this.
You just saw it outside. You saw these thugs that came along.
CNN's Martin Savage was outside in the protest. Here's what he saw.
These are the largest crowds of protesters that we have seen to date, actually. And the numbers of protesters actually began building after the president started speaking. Throughout much of the day, as the rally was being organized and people were starting to make their way in, there were only about 200 protesters. They were greatly outnumbered by Trump's own supporters. But then, several hours later, you began seeing the streets just fill up with protesters, most of them representing Black Lives Matter or causes like those that have been demonstrated against for the past couple of weeks. They're running right into, of course, many of those who were inside for the president's rally. It's a potentially dangerous mix, but so far, it has been peaceful, it's boisterous, it's loud, and yeah, there are a lot of face-to-face confrontations. But the protesters continue to work their way through the streets, blocking traffic, but really nothing more so far. Martin Savage, CNN, Tulsa.
All right, let's talk to CNN political commentator Errol Lewis to get some thoughts on this. He's also the host of the You Decide podcast. Errol, it's good to see you. Been a while.
Yes, you too, Christy. Good
All
to see
righty.
you.
So when we look at everything that President Trump said yesterday about the testing, about defunding police, about the protesters, there's one thing that stood out to me. Let's take a look at who voted for him in 2016. The biggest block of voters for the president was 50 to 64 years old. 30% of them showed up. 53% of them voted for President Trump. The third largest block was the 65 plus. 53% again voted for the president. That's the age group that is most affected by COVID. The president has said COVID is in ashes. He said a miracle is what will cure it. Now he's saying let's not test the numbers so we don't know essentially how bad it is. Is there any read into what he's saying now and how that might affect all of these people who may be most affected by COVID and what they'll do in 2020?
Well, honestly, we already know, Christy, from the polling data that the seniors, the 65 and up, they long ago walked away from President Trump. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, they were favoring Joe Biden. Even more so now, and there's nothing about what he's saying that's going to turn that around. The reality is there's lots of folks, my dad being one of them. Happy Father's Day, Dad. He's living with this the way a lot of seniors are, in a way where he can't see his grandkids. We can only visit him one at a time. There's a real serious problem here that the president is trying to pretend does not exist. He gives these half-truths, and then the explanation from the White House was that he was, quote-unquote, joking about slowing down the testing. Now, there's 121,000 people who have died so far. The country is losing something like 800 people a day, Christy. 20,000 people a month are dying from this thing. It's real serious. It's affecting seniors more than anybody else. And the president clearly doesn't have a plan. He didn't announce a plan. He didn't describe what he intends to do about it. He's kind of trying to pretend that it's going to all go away. And seniors are not falling for that. So his support among seniors, which is a key part of how he won 4 years ago, they walked away from him a while ago, and he's doing nothing, it seems, to get them back, Christy.
Errol, no mention of George Floyd, no significant passage on policing or systemic racism. Are you surprised that he didn't even pay lip service to it?
Yeah, I actually am a little bit. I thought he was either going to mention the Tulsa massacre, which is why he moved the rally from the 19th to the 20th, or that he was going to talk about these national upheavals that have been going on now for over 3 weeks and have started to change the law. I mean, laws are being introduced that he's going to have to vote on. It's not like it's a remote concern. What he confined it to was a purely partisan attack on the mostly Democratic mayors of cities where a lot of the protests are going on, where he's saying he's offering to sort of bring down some kind of federal force and disperse the protests within an hour, he says. This is not at all in step with the mood of what's actually going on. There are city councils, there are mayors, there are attorneys general all over the country that are dealing with this in a serious way. Again, legislation from the city council level all the way up to Congress, where people are trying to grapple with this. Protesters are still in the street, not because of Donald Trump or whether he's holding a rally or his reelection. The stakes are actually much higher. And so I was a little surprised that he didn't want to try to get in on one of the biggest national stories. And it's not like he has nothing to say. There is a law and order message out there that resonates with some people that the president could well have articulated, but he chose not to. He went straight for kind of partisan red meat and some distortions about it. And he really runs the risk, Victor, of being left behind on this really key issue as we get closer and closer to Election Day.
Errol, who is watching this closely, of course, was the Biden camp as well. And his national co-chairman, Louisiana Republican Cedric Richmond, said this: "I want Trump out there every day, talking and rambling and doing what he does best, because it was a disaster tonight. Objective people watching that speech, they do not see a commander-in-chief. They see a guy having a temper tantrum who it's all about him." Add to that the fundraising totals for May that came out, $80.8 million for Biden to President Trump, $74 million. How much harm is the president doing to himself? And prognosticate for us what the Biden camp will do with this.
Well, listen, the president had a bad night, politically speaking. His reelection campaign is off to a not great start. And Joe Biden having outraised the president in the last month, it's pretty good for a so-called sleepy guy in a basement. On the other hand, I think it's really premature for the Biden camp to get too comfortable. This is a group that has shown time and time again throughout 2016 and really even throughout the presidency, they can adapt, they can respond. I'm sure heads are going to roll. People might get fired. Strategies are going to change. It is way too early to count Donald Trump out. But no question about it. He had an awfully bad night. And it shows some real weaknesses that they're going to have to shore up. This very poor display that they had last night is in Trump country, in the middle of Trump country. They're going to have to do way, way better than that. The good news, I guess, for the Trump team is that they know how bad this is, and they're going to have to sort of fix it, and they've got time. They've got, about 135 days to turn it around.
Yeah, the congressman we spoke with yesterday, Markwayne Mullin, reminded us that President Trump won all 77 counties there in Oklahoma, and they had an overflow space for 40,000, and 40 people didn't show up for the overflow. So, yes, they do have some work to do. Errol Lewis, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Errol.
So there is more confusion about the firing of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Attorney General Bill Barr says that President Trump fired the top prosecutor there, but President Trump says he has nothing to do with it. We're going to talk about these mixed messages.
And southern states reporting an increase in positive coronavirus tests among younger people. We'll talk more about that and what it means straight ahead for the summer. Well, according to the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary, they can now confirm early coronavirus test kits, yes, may have been contaminated, leading to a possible delay in the CDC's ability to get those kits to health labs.
Right now, in several southern states, health departments say that more young people are testing positive for the virus. Now, some of them say that's because of widespread testing, but others believe that part of the problem is a lack of social distancing. Let's go to CNN's Polo Sandoval. He's in New York City. Polo, good morning. Tomorrow, the city will enter phase 2 of reopening. What does phase 2 look like there?
Well, hopefully it'll mean that people will finally be able to get a haircut, for starters. You also have, of course, the long-awaited restaurants that have been closed for months. What phase 2 means is that some of those restaurants will finally be able to take in customers again, as long as, of course, that dining is outdoors. The city of New York has made special arrangements for some of these restaurants to essentially spill out of their facilities so that they can set up socially distant tables on curbsides, even some closed streets. So it's certainly something that people are looking forward to. So you have the dining, you have the barber shops, you have the salons, office spaces as well. But of course, they do have to maintain those strict cleaning procedures, as well as socially distant procedures as well. Elsewhere, though, Florida is certainly getting the attention of health officials right now for another consecutive day, shattering its own record, 4,000 new cases in just one day, shattering the previous record of about 3,200 that was on Thursday. We heard from Florida's governor at the start of the weekend saying the majority of those cases are people in their mid-30s, and the governor's saying that he does expect that average age to slowly decrease here. But the main focus for Florida officials right now is obviously the health facilities. The big concern here, and the reason why they fear that this could possibly become the next U.S. epicenter, is because of the aging population of the state, also the large number of long-term care facilities. So really what we're seeing in Florida is that focus on hospitals, making sure that they're able to maintain that capacity, because those numbers do continue to rise. Of course, the big question, why is that happening? Governor DeSantis did say that it was increased testing, something that we heard from the president again yesterday. But when you hear from medical experts, they say that really is not the case. In fact, the more testing that happens, the more positive cases are identified, and that usually leads to a lower number of COVID cases. Victor Christie, back to you.
Polo Sandoval, thanks so much.
Let's bring in Dr. Michelle McMurray-Heath. She's the president and CEO of BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Doctor, thank you for being with us. It's so good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to first ask you, before we get into talking about some vaccines, what the president said last night about when you do testing to a great degree, essentially, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. Can we beat this pandemic without that testing?
Well, The important thing is to drive as many people who need treatment into treatment so that they have supportive care and can hopefully recover. The only way that can happen is if people get tested, if they know if they've been exposed, if they know if they're actually developing COVID. So it's very, very important to people to follow the local public health guidelines, get tested if you think you've been exposed or have symptoms, and please take good care of yourselves.
So I wanted to ask you about vaccine. We know Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson have been greenlit by the federal government for some decisive studies and testing for COVID-19 vaccine. Based on what you know of either these potential vaccines or others, what component do you look for in these testings that would tell you, for vaccines, that would tell you a vaccine has potential to be successful?
Well, we have real reason for hope right now, and this is the amazing good news. The Biotechnology Innovation Organization represents over 1,000 companies in the healthcare space, and what we've seen over a mere 20 weeks, I mean, if you stop to think about it, 5 months ago, no one really knew what COVID was. And here we are, a mere 20 weeks later, and we have seen over 550 different projects underway to try to find new drugs and vaccines to combat COVID among our companies. It's absolutely nothing short of incredible. 135 of these are trained in developing new vaccines, and we've just heard over the last few days that 3 of these are entering what we call phase 3 clinical trials. Now that is huge news because phase 3 is the final step, the final testing step before we know that a new vaccine is safe and effective for the public and can then become available. So we're hearing that these new vaccines, these leading candidates, may enter this stage as early as late summer or the fall, and we're hoping that perhaps by next spring we will have a vaccine that can help protect us from COVID, because that is the most important thing to have in our arsenal right now.
So how plausible is it that there might be more than one vaccine, and would different vaccines treat different people?
It is completely possible. I mean, we're seeing things like different blood groups may have different reactions to COVID, so we want to have as many armaments in our arsenal as possible. And we also want to have as many opportunities to get this right as possible. There is too much at stake. So knowing that we have 135 companies that are rallying to the call and working to develop a new vaccine is great news. And we want as many of these to become available and ready for the public as we possibly can. And we want to make sure that we're adhering to incredible scientific rigor so that we know at the end of the day, the ones that make it through are going to be safe for the public and they're going to be effective in fighting COVID.
Adjust expectations for us. You just mentioned the spring, but there are some companies saying we could have something by the end of the year. If there was a vaccine that was developed by then, how confident would you be based on the expeditious nature of pushing it out?
You know, it's a very good question, and I hear this often. People saying, well, we're going so fast, how can we know it's going to work? How can we know it's going to be safe? And the good news is I'm a former FDA official, so I know that the people at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will cut no corners when it comes to insisting on testing, insisting on making sure that anything that makes it through we have confidence in, we know it works, we know it's effective, and we know it's safe. And that's exactly as it should be. We want to have confidence in our drugs, in our vaccines when they make it to market. So what we're seeing is unprecedented speed on the scientific front, but we're also seeing unprecedented collaboration between the federal government and scientists, those in academia and those in companies. Everyone is rallying together and trying to find the fastest way possible. And this can only be done because we've made concerted investments in our scientific infrastructure over the years, over the decades, and that is allowing us to go at a new rate that we haven't seen possible before.
Dr. Michelle Murray-Heath, we are so grateful to have your expertise. Thank you for taking time for us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
The investigation of a deadly shooting that happened in Seattle's autonomous zone, why police officers say they were unable to get into that area to reach the victims. Chairman Jerry Nadler says the House Judiciary Committee will investigate the firing of U.S. Attorney Geoffrey Berman.
Now, his departure comes after 48 hours of some mixed messaging. He actually resigned a day after he said that he wouldn't step down. Attorney General William Barr asked the U.S. president to fire him, which he says The president did.
Yes, but the president says that it was Barr's decision and that he was not involved. Evan Perez has more.
President Trump fired Geoffrey Berman, the Manhattan U.S. attorney who had refused to resign after Bill Barr, the attorney general, had tried to oust him on Friday. The attorney general delivered the news in a letter to Berman saying, quote, "Unfortunately, with your statement of last night, you have chosen public spectacle over public service. Because you have declared that you have no intention of resigning, I have asked the president to remove you as of today, and he has done so." Berman was overseeing a number of sensitive investigations, including the investigation into Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney. Berman says that he is making way for his deputy, Audrey Strauss, who is highly regarded in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he says will be able to protect all of the sensitive investigations that are still ongoing in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. Evan Perez, CNN, Washington.
Evan, thank you. Now, Seattle police have just released surveillance and body camera video from yesterday morning's deadly shooting in the Chaz protest zone.
So the officers, they were responding to a report of a shooting at a park inside the autonomous zone. This is in the Capitol Hill section of the city. Now, the police say that there were some angry protesters and what they call a violent crowd prevented them from getting to the two shooting victims. Those victims were taken to the hospital by medics in the zone. One of the victims later died at the hospital. There have been no arrests.
And Atlanta police are investigating a shooting near the site where Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed by a former police officer. A police spokesman says the incident happened early yesterday evening. It was an adult male who'd been shot in the leg in a drive-by shooting.
Meantime, about 150 protesters were in Atlanta last night outside a police station near the site of where Brooks was killed. You see there a flag burned. One woman was heard singing "America the Beautiful" as she waved a flag on fire. The Atlanta Fire and Rescue issued an arrest warrant for Natalie White as well. She's in the pictures here in this tweet on your screen. She's been identified as a suspect in the fire there at the Wendy's where Brooks was killed. A source tells CNN that investigators are working with the idea that Rayshard Brooks had a relationship with this woman.
Well, authorities and the family of a murdered teenager are offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the capture of her killer. Nakia Crawford is who you see there. She was shot and killed while she was inside a vehicle around 1:25 p.m. last Sunday. This happened in Akron, Ohio. She's just 18 years old. She'd recently celebrated graduating from Akron's North High School. Now, police have since found this black Chevy Camaro they say is linked to the shooting, and there are warrants now for the three individuals that you see on your screen. So if you have any information, you are encouraged to call the Akron Police Department, or alternatively, you can call Crime Stoppers as well. Those numbers also on your screen, but we know that the Crawfords, the family there, would certainly appreciate your help.
A federal judge has denied the White House's request to stop the release of John Bolton's new book, but President Trump is claiming they won. Coming up, we're going to talk about that and the trouble that Bolton could still face.
It appears that John Bolton's new book is going to be in stores this Tuesday. Yesterday, a federal judge rejected the Justice Department's request to stop the publication of The Room Where It Happened.
In the book, President Trump's former national security advisor claims the president put personal gain over the interests of the United States. So let's bring in Brian Stelter, chief media correspondent and host of Reliable Sources. Brian, good morning to you. It really wasn't a total victory for Bolton because the judge implied that Bolton could lose some money here, maybe face charges for disclosing classified information.
That's right. Bolton won in the first inning of this game or of this lawsuit, but it will go forward. This is probably a situation where Bolton will eventually have to give up the money that he made to write the book, a reported $2 million. So this may be a loss for Bolton in the long term, but it's a win in the short term because the book will actually come out. It officially comes out on Tuesday. Lots of reporters already have copies. And there are so many revelations in this book. Honestly, it could deserve a week's worth of news cycles because there are so many important revelations. Look at page page 458, and Bolton talking about obstruction of justice. You know, you look at what's happened this weekend with SDNY and Berman being fired. This is what Bolton wrote on page 458. He said, the pattern of Trump's behavior looked like obstruction of justice as a way of life, which we couldn't accept. I just think those kinds of comments in the wake of the impeachment trial, in the wake of obstruction of justice claims with regards to Ukraine, Bolton is saying that that was going on all around the world. And there are some specific claims about Bill Barr and about SDNY that are very relevant to the current news cycle. So I think when Bolton starts to do press for this book, which actually starts tonight, and then he's going to be on CNN, he's going to be on all the major networks, this is going to be a thorn in the president's side for weeks to come.
It's going to be a thorn in his side, but if the judge has reason to believe that Bolton did, in fact, compromise national security by disclosing classified information, does that give credence to his book?
I think it does. Yes, I think it does. And that's what's going to be playing out in the coming innings. What was classified? Did Bolton follow the rules, or did he break the rules? But all these claims that he's just a liar and he's a wacko and that he's making stuff up, which is essentially the Trump narrative, that is contradicted by the government's concern that Bolton is leaking out the truth. That's right.
So let's talk about this rally from last night and the claim online that some activists, they are the reason that there were these thousands of empty seats and no overflow as expected.
That's absolutely right. This is a suggestion that that people on TikTok, young people on TikTok, were telling their friends to sign up for tickets, RSVP, to make the crowd count seem really high, but then, of course, they're not going to show up, so it would embarrass Trump. There are some reports about this that actually were from several days ago, so we know this was a real phenomenon. I think it's probably exaggerated, but it was a real phenomenon, and the Trump campaign, of course, bragged about it, said they had 1 million RSVPs. Here's how the president talked about the crowd days before, because I think the reason why this whole crowd size thing matters is because it matters to the president. Here's what he said at the White House last week, or a few days ago.
But we're either close to or over 1 million people wanting to go. We have a 22,000 seat arena, but I think we're going to also take the convention hall next door, and that's going to hold 40,000. So we'll have 22,000 plus 40,000, which would mean that we'd have over 900,000 people that won't be able to go, but hopefully they'll be watching. But it's an amazing, nobody's ever heard of numbers like this. And we expect to have, you know, it's like a record-setting crowd. We've never had an empty seat, and we certainly won't in Oklahoma.
Oof, there's the line at the end. We've never had an empty seat, and we won't have an empty seat in Tulsa. Of course, now, because of the over-promising and the under-delivering, this is a story around the world. It's a global story now that this did not perform up to expectations, and that's going to be embarrassing for President Trump in the days to come.
Brian, we need a good story. I know you've got one for us.
Do we? Oh, really? You want a good story? I'll give you a good story. Let me introduce you to my 10-month-old son, Story, who I just was just in the other room with making pancakes for Father's Day. What do you think? Is that a good news story? This is Story Moon, and he's learning how to say Dada just in time for Father's Day. So I'm pretty impressed by that. But you're looking at Bolton's book. What a news junkie. What a nerd.
Happy Father's Day to you, Dad.
But there you go. That's the one benefit of working from home, y'all, is that they're always right nearby.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, happy Father's Day.
See you later.
Hey, Story.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stelter.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a good story.
And listen, being a good story. See you later. Yeah, you will see him later. Brian's show, Reliable Sources, at 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. Don't miss it.
So the demonstrations for racial justice have inspired athletes to speak up and do something. Now an NBA coach is joining in. He's leading